This episode is brought to you by Summer School Electronics. With pedals like the Snow Day Delay, the Pep Rally Fuzz, the Trash Panda, and my personal favorite, the Science Fair, which is two classic dirt pedals in one, with a mid-boosted overdrive on one side, a black lab rat circuit on the other, and a blend knob to blend between them to find the perfect classic stacked dirt sound you're looking for, it's hard not to find something you'll love. Mark builds all of his pedals by hand in Syracuse, New York, where he also works as a full-time educator. In addition to the super fun graphics on their pedals, Mark also offers custom artwork. Want your dog's face on a pedal? He can do it. Want your face on a pedal? He can make that happen too. Go over to summerschoolelectronics.com and make sure to tell him that 40 Watt Podcast sent you. This episode is brought to you by the supporters of 40 Watt Podcast over on Patreon. Go over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast, where for as little as $3 per month, you can help support the podcast and get every episode ad-free. For $5 a month, you'll get every episode ad-free, as well as a bonus episode every week. I can't overstate how thankful I am for the support of my patrons, and hope you'll consider joining the team and helping keep this show on the road. Hello, 40 Watters. Welcome to another episode of 40 Watt Podcast. I am your host, Philip. I'm excited for this week's show, as I am most weeks. I'd be really upset if I was ever not excited for a show. So I think it's really important to let you know a couple of things here in the beginning before we get started. Yes, I know there are bumpers and there are you get ads in the middle of the podcast that say all this stuff, but this one's a big one. It's a big deal to me. This week's episode is brought to you by Grez Guitars. I've welcomed Barry from Grez Guitars as a sponsor for the podcast for this season, and I'm really excited to have him on board. I've got a couple of Grez guitars of my own. I think they're incredible guitars. Go over to Instagram. You can find the link for Barry's Instagram and his website down in the description below. Go over there, check out what he's doing. He's on the verge of, and maybe by the time this episode's come out, releasing something really cool and new. Check that out. It'll be on his Instagram and on his website. All right. This week, I have someone who probably needs no introduction, and you've already read it in the title of this episode, so you know who it is. But I have Corey Congilio, Nashville guitarist, YouTuber, instructor. Corey, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks. I'm sure there's plenty of introduction that needs to happen.
Well, you know what? I'm slowly discovering that the podcast has finally gotten to a point where the Venn diagram of my listeners and already knowing everyone in this industry is actually starting to separate a little bit. So I'm actually finding I'm really happy every time I get to introduce some of my listeners to someone new. But you're pretty prolific. You've got lessons out there. You've got your YouTube channel is really taking off and being busy, and then you're constantly playing and being busy. Like, for example, this weekend as we're recording, so not necessarily, this is in the past for y'all, right. Sorry. Friday you played a gig. Saturday you're up at 10 a.m. on a session. It's like, like I think your Instagram post said, like the old times. You know?
I mean, there was a time when that was, more of the schedule than not, but things have changed.
Yeah, things are definitely different. You can do an awful lot from your home studio now. You don't have to necessarily go into the studio anymore. So let's back it up though, and for those listeners that aren't as familiar, or maybe you've got some YouTube viewers that are watching this video or listening to this podcast who have never heard the story. How did you get into playing guitar? Like, how'd you discover the guitar, playing music, and then what led you down the route that got you here?
Well, I started playing saxophone in third grade, and as it turns out, on my father's side of the family, there were four boys and one girl. Mm-hmm. All the boys played guitar or bass. Now that sounds like, oh man, you were in the Partridge Family. No, not at all. They may have seen each other once a year, and if they could get through that event without coming to fisticuffs.
Sure, major family drama.
Right. So I wasn't influenced by them other than the fact that they did what I wanted to do. And the reason I wanted to play guitar is because you can't sing with a saxophone in your mouth. And I'm a guitar player first and a singer second, but working on the latter. And it just always seemed like I don't know, I could do more with what I wanted to on guitar. And when I picked it up, I progressed a lot faster on that instrument than on saxophone. So once I started playing guitar, it was like no looking back, pretty much.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. So you pick up guitar, you start playing. How did that translate into? I feel like gigging, if you're anything like me, gigging just sort of happened. Like it just, there wasn't like this big monumental moment where you just started becoming a gigging guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
People started inviting you out to their gigs and you sat in, and then you can tell me if your story is anything like this. This is the way it was for me. Started sitting in, and then like the sit in became longer and they exhausted all the songs I knew, and I just started having to make it up as I go. And then eventually, someone's like, I grew up in the Mississippi Delta playing with a bunch of blues bands, and it eventually became, hey, we got a gig, at this, juke joint
Right.
next weekend. Bring your gear. You're in, you're basically in the band at that point. It was real weird. How did you make that leap from learning guitar into being a gigging guitarist and then into the studio world?
You know, my situation was probably a lot different than yours.
Yeah.
It's actually not unlike what I still have to do today, which is I got to knock on the doors. Nobody, even though I was probably one of the few guitar players in my little town that actually had enough proficiency to play with bands, that didn't mean they just swooped me up and were like,
Yeah.
come and play with us. My freshman year of high school, I had to reach out to the senior who I knew had a band. And he said, well, we already have a guitar player. I'm a guitar player. And then I was like, but you probably don't. He played keys too. And I was like, you probably don't play like I play. Cause I was probably like the hottest young guitar player in the high school of the two that were in it, mind you.
Right.
So there was the small pool. And then, once I did that, I was also working in a local music store and had to do the same thing. Had to talk to all the older cats about like, what do I do? And they're like, come out to this blues jam. How old are you? I was like, I'm 18. They're like, all right, do you have a gig bag? And I said, no. They're like, buy a gig bag and you put your guitar in it and you walk in the bar like you own the joint and nobody will say anything to you. And that's exactly what happened. And then I started kind of doing that around some other places. And then I would meet some older guys that like would kind of get me in on some stuff here and there. But that didn't last very long because in that part of the world, I moved from that part of the world to about 5 hours west to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I started playing a lot more. But even still, I had to do the same thing. I had to ask people, can I help? Can I roadie for your band? I had to do these things to get into clubs being underage. And then once they said, oh, you can actually play, then they were even more gracious. So, I didn't just get to sit in my room and or have my parents drive me to an audition or something. I had to hustle and still do.
I think that kind of story is important for guitarists today to hear, because a lot of them have and even when I was doing it and finding these bands, it started by going to the shows that these other bands were playing and becoming friends with them. And eventually, they find out you can play and they'll ask you to sit in, and then it builds from there. But even in the situation where you're knocking on the doors, and a lot of guitarists sit back, even in today with Instagram being what it is and YouTube being what it is, it's not going to just happen for you. You got to put in the hours and the beating the streets. And I think Rhett has said a few times on his channel over the years, when people inevitably ask the question, how do I meet other musicians and get in bands? You go where they are. You just got to get in that crowd and go see and play and be friends, and don't network, quote unquote. I hate the networking thing. Just be real, just chat. And I think it's a cool thing because you're playing. I really resonate with, because you play in a way and a style. You make stylistic choices. You make tonal choices that are very similar to the stuff I like to play and the things I like to hear. So I've really gravitated to the way you play. So I love hearing how different the way you got into it is. Because, for example, you're doing that in high school. I didn't even start playing guitar until the last half of my senior year of high school.
Oh, okay.
So I was real late in coming to guitar. So what is your gigging life now? I'm real curious about this because, COVID changed the game for a lot of people that were in like the smaller scenes. Like I guess the big touring acts haven't seen that much of a shift once everything came back.
Oh, you'd be
But
surprised.
oh, really?
Oh, I mean, so in, I guess it would be early 2020, I started thinking, man, I should probably take this online stuff more seriously.
Mhm.
And I was touring with a country artist at the time. Um, and I went to the NAMM show. Well, it was late 2019, let's say this summer. And I was getting kind of like feeling like I didn't want to do this right now. I wanted to be home, like working on an online business, I was as shocked as anybody to feel that way. But when you're playing on a flatbed truck in Bismarck, North Dakota, and it's 100 degrees and a 45-minute sound check turns into 2 hours because the local sound company doesn't have their shit together and the power keeps browning out every time you hit a note, you start to get a little like, what am I doing here? This wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And that's what started to kind of move the needle for me. And then the 2020 NAMM show happens. More people knew me in 2020 because of the little stuff I started to do online, which I hadn't like fully dove into yet. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Okay. And even like other people who had already established themselves, like a Rhett or a Tim Pierce or people like that. Like I knew those guys beforehand, but I started to get closer to them because they were like, you should be doing what we're doing because you have something to offer. So I was like, yeah, I think I might. And, and then you start to see more people get their picture taken with Rick Beato than like, Joe Walsh. And you're like, oh, the climate has changed. And that's not like the sole reason. It was just I'm a very crow's nest looking person. I like to see things before they happen if they can, so I can protect myself in my future endeavors. And I think that's what I've been able to do fairly successfully. So when I decided to do that, it was like, oddly enough, perfect for me because I quit the touring gig I was on, started to dive into the online stuff pretty hardcore. And then COVID happened. And it was like, oh, I was already set up for it. And I certainly didn't plan it. No one else did. But I was, pretty insulated here in Nashville. I know a lot of touring people. And the despair that was like felt across Instagram was huge. And I was just like, holy shit, did I make the right move? Because now I'm set up to do whatever, even if that happens again. I don't have to tour. And then I also said to myself, well, wait a second, maybe this is a good time to start kind of working on my own guitar playing and artistry. Because when people meet you virtually online, they have no idea that you spent your last 20 years as a side musician. Do you know what I mean? They think, well, you're just a guitar player.
Right.
Impress us. And it's like, well, no, I impress the artist I'm playing for so that I get a paycheck, and I can go on to the next thing, or the producer I'm doing a session for or something. They don't necessarily see that life of you because it's hard to document that. It's easier now, but it's still a little weird to kind of document your session or your, other stuff that kind of, your backstage performance or, or lifestyle. So, but to circle back to what you said, like, man, what happened was everybody was off the road. They stopped. Some of the bigger artists had clients or had musicians and staff on salary. And that started like 6 months. They'd have this salary. Another 6 months would go by, management would reach out and they would say, hey, we got to cut you down another quarter of your pay. And that would just kept happening until 2021 or 22 rolls around and people are trying to get back on the road. Now there's this log jam of everybody trying to go on tour at the same time to make some money back. And I know the guys in Brothers Osborne fairly well. And they were like, we had to work our asses off because they paid their whole crew through the pandemic proudly, and there's I would say a handful of great artists like that. I wouldn't say there's lots, but I think they probably did what they can. Brothers did more than they could. But yeah, everybody had to jump back on the road to make money, so they felt it here.
I do remember seeing the moment it was sort of the all clear was given. It felt like I got emails from every major artist, because you get on these lists, especially you try to stay up on what's going
Yeah.
on, especially as
Mhm.
I'm building a podcast here and it's an interview base, so I'm trying to get people, and it's like I'm trying to pay attention to everything and everyone, and just my inbox was flooded with tour announcements the moment the all
Sure.
clear was given.
Sure.
And I think coupled with the fact that there were an awful lot of venues that didn't come back after COVID.
Yeah.
Like mostly small to medium size, the big ones pretty much were still there, but a lot of small to medium sized venues, those 250 to about 2,500 cap rooms, they vanished. They didn't come
For
back from
sure.
it. So now you've got all these artists going back on the road all at once with fewer venues to play to.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
there's even some of my favorite spots in town here have closed. Now, I don't exactly know why, but I would imagine that's part of it. Like the whole Cannery Row Mercy Lounge thing here has changed. And I just did a photo shoot at a place called the Eighth Room, which used to be a room called Douglas Corner. And then, of course, like downtown is completely different than it used to be. There's been tons and tons of changes here, whether they were happening before COVID or after.
Right.
That pandemic has certainly, shaped all of us for the rest of our lives,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So on that topic, let's shift into that just a little bit because it is a conversation I have. I had it an episode or so ago with it was in a short form talking to Nelly from Collings Guitars about the Austin scene and how Austin is changing and sort of how that parallels Nashville.
Right.
So when did you make the move to Nashville?
I've been here for over 10 years.
Okay.
And yeah, have seen it completely change from year to year, sometimes quarter to quarter. But yeah, I got in at a good time, bought a house at a good time, or as good as it could be. It wasn't the best time, but I'm in. So I'm official real estate owner in Nashville, which is highly challenging, especially for a musician on a musician's budget to be in the city limits. Most of my musician friends live 30, 40 minutes outside of town.
Yeah.
Where you get more for your money. But I was a single guy that didn't have kids and just needed, a small place that could get me close to the airport.
Yeah, that's a big deal, especially if you're on the road and you're playing and you're touring. You got to get close to the airport.
Right. Yeah, I mean, otherwise you don't want to leave an hour before you have to get there.
Exactly. I lived in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, back in 02 to 04 because I was going to MTSU for recording industry management, like so many.
Yeah.
And even back then, it was still just 4-lane between Murfreesboro and Nashville, and Murfreesboro was about 75, 80,000 people. Now it's like 150, 160,000, or I don't know. I haven't looked up the most recent census. I think it's like 6 lanes each way from Murfreesboro to Nashville now. I don't actually know anymore because I try not to drive that way anymore when I get up to Nashville.
Yeah, sadly, I live off of 24, about 20 minutes north of Murfreesboro. So, between 3 and 6 p.m., steer clear. And that was my thing. I didn't want to live off that road, but the real estate price was right. So, and I was comfortable with the area.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's also you just got to get in where you can get in because
exactly that was the whole thing. Yeah,
the way everything was changing. There's been much made about a lot of people talking about the way Nashville is growing and expanding and tearing down what really should be some historic places that are disappearing. Second and Broadway is not what it once was. It's very, I don't know. There aren't as many old school honky tonk bands playing on Second and Broadway anymore.
Not even close.
I think there's like one place that still plays, and I can't even remember which one. Is it Roberts?
Yeah, and Layla's too.
Okay, good deal. And I don't even know because I don't go there anymore. Like I don't go to Second and Broadway if I can avoid it.
I was there for the first time last weekend. My wife was out of town, and oddly enough, she had to go to somewhere. Awesome. Yeah. Anyway, there was an old friend from grade school that was in town. She was like, "I'm here with some people. You should come on out." So I went out to see a band, And then I was like, all right, I'll go downtown. Pouring down rain. She's like, we're at Tootsie's. And I was like, oh dear God. No, we're at Legends. We're at Legends. And I was like, oh, I know what this is. And I was like, I don't think I heard one country song in there. I think I heard Blink 182. I heard Miley Cyrus. You know, it was all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you guys want to hear real country, it's like 2 doors down on the left, you know. And that's fine. Like, everybody's got to make a living and do the Broadway thing. That's totally cool. But that was the first time I'd been down there for that kind of hang, maybe in a year. I go to like my wife and I like to see comedy, so we'll go to the Ryman. And last time I was there, I played at the Ryman for an artist. So
oh, nice.
If I get downtown, it's purposeful.
Right.
I'm not going down there to drink.
Yeah,
not anymore.
last time I was down there was to see Jason Isbell. He did an 8-show residency there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and went for that and took my wife, and we went, and she had never been on Broadway, so I'm like, okay, we'll go do it, just so you can say you've done it. Yeah, see, I think of Broadway the same way I think of like Bourbon in New Orleans, and I think of Beale Street in Memphis. It's like you need to go see them to say you've been there,
right?
But that's really not where the vibe is anymore. It's moved away. That's become this big, glitzy, touristy, you know, every person's stop, not that roots of Nashville kind of place that it was.
It was funny because I was going to see a band at the Underdog in East Nashville where I played last Friday, and they had no interest. I was like, oh, it's a really cool dive bar, East Nashville. It's like not touristy. They were like, yeah, we're going to stay down here. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, that's frustrating.
I know. I was like, come and see something different.
Yeah, because all of my favorite bars and like between the ones I've played and the ones I like to go to, they tend to be like 100 to 200 cap rooms.
Yeah,
where if there's a stage, there's not much of one. They're you know, it's tiny, and it just, I don't know, it just feels closer and more real, and you see some things that you never would have seen. I think artists in those rooms tend to be a little hungrier too.
Sure.
They think it's a lot cooler. One of my favorite venues is in my hometown of Clarksdale, and it's called Red's. What is the actual name? Red's Lounge, Red's Blues Lounge. Now the owner, Red, has since passed away not too long ago, unfortunately, but it's still operating. And man, it is the grittiest, coolest. You walk it. So it used to be a music store in like the 60s and 70s, and called Levine's Music Center. And at one point it was like the largest music store, I think, in the state of Mississippi.
Wow.
And I've heard all sorts of stories from old school players about ways they used to wheel and deal to get their instruments. I think it was the only Fender dealer in the state of Mississippi at the time. And one guitar player who will remain nameless so that I do not incriminate him definitely told me a story about how people don't steal guitars. Don't steal guitars. But he did. He swiped one. And the way he did it was by putting it out the window of the store, like onto the back, like by the levee. And like, it's wild
Somebody
time.
else
anyway,
comes and grabs it.
Yeah, exactly. Now that store closed, and eventually it became this, you know, dilapidated building, just being honest.
Yeah.
Roof leaked. But it was this tiny room of what was left you could get into the building, the way they segmented the building eventually. It was, I don't know, 30 people in there, and it's completely packed.
Wow, that's cool.
There's no stage. The stage is the dance floor and the bar floor, and it's just the coolest vibe. And those are my favorite places to go, and you don't find those on Broadway, Beale, or
no, and
Bourbon.
Yeah, and it's also, you know, I can't say for Bourbon Street because I've honestly never been there. But with the variety, there's just not isn't. What's nice is once you get outside of these towns, there's usually a little more variety in the music too. And the cool thing about a bar like the Underdog is it's different music every night. And you'd think for a town that says it's Music City would have more of that, but they don't. You know, at least Austin has more diversity typically musically. So it gets frustrating because then it's like you go downtown, it's like not even country. It's Don't Stop Believin', and then it's Green Day, and it's Blink, which is fine. Like I like all that stuff,
Oh,
but it's
sure,
not
yeah.
what you expect, you know. And now it's just like every major country artist has a bar too, which I get it. Like they're big money makers.
Yeah.
But it's like less and less like it used to be. But hey, that's life, you know.
Yeah, and when I was in Murfreesboro, we'd go into town and we'd go to like Mercy Lounge and we'd go
Yeah.
to Exit In and the End, and I always felt like they had this really cool like underground rock culture
Yeah.
going on in those that you didn't get any other place, and it was a lot of fun. I don't even are the Exit In and the End still there?
Exit In is still holding on. The End, I don't know.
It would have been like across the street and a block over.
Yeah, I don't remember if that's still there. But some of my favorite shows that I've ever been to or played have been at Mercy Lounge,
Hmm.
Exit In, 12th and Porter.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, just like, you know, you'd see a lot of showcases there. You'd play in them. You know, um, a lot of times it would be for kind of country stuff, but there would also be a lot of other diverse music in there too. So yeah, it's I'm sure those places are there's other stuff popping up, but you got to look
Yeah.
for it, you know, which is
Yeah,
it's harder to find.
I do love that the Underdog has popped up and has become sort of this like guitar player's haven. Um, it's really
Well,
rad
they don't
that
tell you to turn
because
down, so that's helpful.
that's always a good thing because I'm tired of turning down. I was talking about I think before we started, but I've been playing guitar in this show choir, and show choirs are such an interesting gig. High school show choirs, they do these competitions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Glee, but not nearly as polished as you think it is. It's the best way I describe it to people. It's like Glee and then nothing like Glee. Um, but so they hire bands and we go and we play these gigs, and I'm playing in a band this year. It's the first one that's ever told me, "Hey, you're not loud enough." I was like, "All right, let's go." So it's a very, very guitar oriented show. And so I love when people appreciate guitar because my goal is not to be so loud it's unbearable, but it's to be at a volume that I feel like brings a certain energy,
Yeah,
if that makes
of
sense.
course. Yeah, there's always a sweet spot. Yeah, when I was
Yeah.
playing with David Lee Murphy,
Hmm.
I talked to his other guitar player before I got the gig, and he's like, "The only thing he'll ever tell you is to turn up," and I was like, "I'm in."
Yeah, absolutely. That's all right. Sold.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
So you're playing gigs. You moved to Nashville. When did you the start giving lessons, and how did that translate into the video lessons that you do now?
Well, you know, I had been teaching private, like, you know, in music store,
Hmm.
um, 2001, 2002. Um, then in around 2007, I was introduced. Well, actually, I got hired by the company Fishman to do demos for them. And they needed somebody, they were coming out with these acoustic effects pedals, right? Now they recently have just done that again. But these were bigger and more feature rich, but probably too expensive and missed the mark. But
Sure.
they didn't have anybody at the factory that could do like stereo ping pong, flangey, phasey delays or any. They wanted it to sound like this wall of sound with acoustic guitar. So a friend of mine that worked at the company said, "Hey, you're perfect for this. We want to just send you a bunch of gear and see what you can do. Fly you to the company, put on a presentation for us, um, and then see where it goes from there." So I was like, "Great." So I'm playing some stuff, and it's the Guitar Center, like local like district managers that are all there, and they're kind of pitching to them.
Yeah.
And Larry Fishman walks in with this big grin on his face, and I was like, "Okay, he likes it." So then immediately they're like, "All right, well, you come to Sweetwater with us next month and demo there." So you got to think this is 2007. There's not a lot of like video. There's not a guitar demo guy. So I felt like I'd like hit the, you know, end of the rainbow here. This
Yeah.
company's paying me like $1,500 for the week or something. I'm like, this is freaking amazing to go to Sweetwater and they pay everything for me. And this is so cool. So I started doing a lot more of that. And they said, "Hey, we really like what you do, but you're too expensive." Not that I was charging them a lot. I was an expense they hadn't, you know, thought of. They said,
Right.
can we give you some like other roles, like some like part-time artist relations and some social media was just starting to happen with regard to the posting that you see all the time now. And they said, we want to do this series of videos on our gear, and we're going to go to this place in Florida who's going to shoot it for us. Now, I did not know that we were headed to the True Fire Studios.
Oh, okay.
And that's how I got introduced to them. They're like, hey, you're actually pretty good at this on camera. Do you teach? And I was like, hell yeah, I teach like 60, 70 students a week, every day, Monday through Saturday, through, 3 o'clock to 9 p.m. and, 10 to 5 on Saturday. I was loaded back to back students.
Yeah.
And I was like, of course I teach. This is like no big deal. And they said, well, that's really what we do. And I was like, yeah, I saw all these pictures of like Arlen Roth and, Muriel Anderson and Tommy Emmanuel, all these people hanging around. So I knew they did something other than, videos for companies, but they had a way to track the analytics better than most people did. Again, 2007,
Right.
You couldn't even post a YouTube video on your website. It was just too intense. And they had an ability to do that, and Fishman was all into it. So once I met True Fire, we kind of started courting each other about doing a course, and it took a little while to figure out what I was going to do with them. And then once we did, it was kind of off to the races, and I started doing courses with them. I have 20 courses, I think, with them now.
Yeah.
But I haven't made any since 2020 because
This podcast is supported in part by String Joy Strings. I'm a snob, at least that's what people tell me. I'm never okay with good enough, and that's where String Joy Strings come in. They're better than good enough. They're the best. String Joy are making some of the finest strings available today right up the road from me in Nashville, Tennessee. They offer custom sets, balanced tension, coated strings, the works. If you need it, they can probably make it happen. You should be using String Joy Strings, and if you're going to order from them, you really could help this podcast out by clicking the affiliate link down in the description or show notes below. You get amazing strings, I get a little bit of that back to help the show keep going. It's a win-win situation. Get your String Joy Strings today.
In 2022, I started my own True Fire, basically called workingclassguitar.com. And it's kind of morphed. That's like the fast forwarded story. That's the abridged version of where I started to where I am right now. So now I know how to do it on my own. People were telling me to do it on my own for 10 years. And I was like, nah, I don't really bother with that. Then I'm like, oh, it's actually cooler to do it on your own. You have more control over every aspect of it. You're not just coming in, getting the check and walking out. So, and I'm a little bit of like protective about what I put out there, how it influences people. I want an interaction with the people. Now I can talk directly to all of my students and customers. And we give them like super solid customer support. Not that nobody else does, but it's important for us to do that,
Yeah, no, it's really rad. I've checked out your True Fire courses because I work with, I have an affiliate code with True Fire, which is below, but I will also put a link down below for your courses so that people know where to find it.
Well, what we can do is give we'll do our 14-day free trial link, and then it's a discounted monthly membership. After that, you can get courses a la carte, or you can join the membership, which also gets you a monthly Zoom call with me and all of our VIPs. So we get on and we talk about what we've learned that month, or people ask me questions, and it's really, really inexpensive per month for what you get. And we upload new courses every month, so there's always new content.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so that link will be down below, listeners or viewers, if you are watching on YouTube. While you're down there looking for the link, hit subscribe and thumbs up and all those things, and follow the podcast. It's interesting because a lot of people look at the cost of some of these video lesson courses and they think, oh, it's so expensive. And you mentioned the cost; it's inexpensive for what you get.
Yeah.
Well, I was having a conversation with at the show choir gig, because most of the band are adult players who have been doing this a while. Many of them are music educators, and some of them give lessons. Some of them just actually teach in middle schools and high schools.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the cost of lessons and how some of them were talking about, I give lessons. I do private lessons for students at home, and I do $25 an hour. I'm like, you do what? I was like, no, man, it's like the going rate for lessons now is so high for private lessons that when you consider those prices, like those guys that do it for $25 an hour don't do that for very long.
Right.
They learn real quick that that's you're losing money at $25 an hour.
Oh, yeah.
And I also told him, I'd get, back when I was teaching, I don't anymore. I had a full-time job and this, and I don't have the time to do it, even though I loved doing it. even back when I was doing it in like the late 2000s, early 2010,
Mm-hmm.
2011, I didn't do hour lessons. I did half hour
Sure, me
lessons
too.
because most of my students were 14 and
Oh
younger,
yeah,
and the attention span was nothing. And so I would do half hour lessons, and it's 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 expensive is basically where I was trying to get to. I went on a slight tangent, but these video lesson courses are really affordable in comparison.
yeah,
And I think you get so much more because you can, one, I like being able to replay it and not
right.
just, if I didn't catch it when they were doing it in a lesson, I'm just out of luck. I'm going to have to ask again next week
Yeah,
when I go back to redo that content. Um, I've really enjoyed it. I need to spend more time with them, to be honest. But I think we're in a time where it is easier than ever to learn guitar.
certainly.
It is. There's so many options out there. There are so many great YouTube channels and paid. I think actually the hardest part is going back to where we started, was finding other musicians to play with. I
Yeah, I mean, well, it's easier than ever to. We'll say this: it's easier than ever to get materials to learn guitar.
Yeah,
I
that's a
don't know
good
if it's
point.
easier than ever to learn guitar because it's still the same. Like I can put a 3 hour course together and sell it for 25 or $30, which is a ton of information.
Yes.
But like when I go through a lesson or something in a book or something I'm trying to learn, it might take me weeks or months just to get that one concept. And I cram 10 of those concepts into one course sometimes, so the process is still the same. It takes a lot of commitment to a particular lesson to really get it to be part of your vocabulary. um, and that's where it still gets tricky. But to your point, like people ask me for individual lessons all the time, and I'll be honest, like I'm probably not charging less than $150 an hour. Like
Yep.
I have to do that because that is going to take time away. Because first of all, like I'll be I get exhausted after a lot of one-on-one stuff, and it's going to put me down for another hour after I do that hour lesson.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of follow-up either, because most people don't want to continue to pay $150 every week to see you. They think, okay, I'm just going to hang with you for an hour, pay the $150, you're going to give me these amazing nuggets, where I might just talk about one little thing and then it's going to be incomplete after that. Whereas the course can get you a larger piece of the pie, and then you can supplement it later. Like on our Zoom calls, people say, "Hey, I went through your arpeggio ebook, but I'm wondering about this. Can you tell me?" Boom, and in 5 minutes, I might give them $150 worth of material of education. You know what I mean? So it's like it's kind of a no brainer to like, you know, how I don't want to say that because somebody's going, of course it's no brainer for you. You're selling the stuff. Well, it's like, yeah, but I work really, really hard to make content and information and lessons that is on one topic but hits multiple layers of relevance, you know what I mean, or ability
Yeah.
levels. So I know for sure I do that really well. Um, and the rest is just filling in the gaps here and there. But guess what? That's the life of a guitar player. No guitar player said, I stayed on this path from day one and now I'm opening for Guns N' Roses. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
that never happens. It's this constant up and down of some days you're killing it, and then the next month you feel like you can't play at all. And then it starts over again, you know?
Yeah. And back to your point a little bit about, um, the value of the course over, the individual lesson and how much it costs. That was the conversation I had with these others. I was like, if you're charging less than $100 for an hour private
Mm-hmm.
lesson, you're losing money at this point, because that time is so valuable. There's so many other ways you can create that value for these students. Now, some of these folks aren't giving guitar lessons that maybe aren't as popular, and they're hunting for students. Like the trombonist in this band is
Right.
hunting for band students to give private lessons to. But I have really loved, as someone who basically grew up in an environment where there were like two people giving guitar lessons, and none of them played the way I played or wanted to play.
Right.
And it was as much work for them to learn the style to teach it to me as it was for me to find someone. I love how easy it is now to find instructors that you relate to and want to play like, and you can get into these video lessons. But then comes into the self-discipline thing of, hey, I don't have the accountability of going to someone's, office or studio every week, and they're going to call me out if I haven't practiced. There's nobody calling me out if I don't pick up a guitar for a
Right.
week,
It's like going to a personal trainer kind of a
Yeah.
thing. And I've had people use that analogy with me a lot. And I'm like, I wish I could, but like, there's not enough hours in the day for me to take on all of the requests that I've gotten and still put out the lessons that people want to see in a course. It's just it's a race to the finish line every month to get the content on my site that looks good, sounds good, rich with assets, like, and it's just it's a house that I love building. I love putting, like, the next course I'm going to do will be like this, new triad exploration kind of a thing. And then there's another one after that that'll be like maybe a funk rhythm course. And I'm just building these places where like people can jump around, but they also can reach out to me via email or on the Zoom call that we do and say like, hey, where can I go next? And we can have little discussions like that. But I usually put so much in the courses that if you really worked at it, you're gonna level up your playing in some area.
So I'm really curious about how doing these lessons and doing YouTube has affected your own playing. Because I found back when I was giving lessons and constantly learning things to teach my students, I learned so much more in that time period and I was a much better guitarist back when I was giving lessons than I am now.
That is, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is the byproduct of doing all this stuff. Is when I started doing the True Fire thing, I was like, oh shit, like I am sloppy, because not only do you hear everything because you're not in a track, like you might be playing to a track,
Right.
but the guitar level's boosted because they want the student to hear it. So it's not like this musical mix. And that was another part of like, why I liked working on my own, is because I could mix the performance the way I wanted to. I could have the angles look the way I wanted to. I could be like, hey, like, my hair is weird there. I could do it over, what I mean? Like anything.
Yeah.
Oh, my shirt is all jacked up. My microphone's screwed up. I can fix all that stuff. But I would notice these like deficiencies in my playing that teaching on camera really helped to dial in a little bit more. And the why is always really important. Okay, I got to know, somebody's going to ask me why this works, and I got to be able to back it up. So that was another thing. So I had to go, because I'm not a music school educated at all. I only did private lessons with people in my neighborhood, and then I learned everything else kind of by digging, just like everyone else kind of probably does. But I don't have a degree in music at all. And some of that has hurt me. Some of it hasn't. And what has helped me become a better player is saying like, well, I should learn how to teach this scale or this arpeggio. So I got to dig in and I got to like kind of search and find a method that not only works for me, but might work for the people that are purchasing it and are interested in it as well. So it's that I've gotten to be a better player in the past 4 years than I was the previous 6 living in Nashville and touring, because when you are touring, playing the same music in this modern world, that's not very, like I was really lucky in the last gig that we have. Some of the soloing was improvised. You could do kind of what you wanted to. It was a very, very short window of time you'd have to improvise. And the chord changes were pretty narrow. Rock country music is usually 4 chords. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you pretty much just play major pentatonic with a little bit of minor thrown in there for, if you can force it.
A bluesy feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is pretty much it. Now that presents its own interesting challenges, because you got to make a cool, fun solo in that short amount of time. It's a challenge. It's fun. I embrace it. But somebody asked me the other day, can you put a melodic minor scale over a country song? And I was like, not unless there's a dominant chord, like really, which you don't hear in country music. And I told that to my friend that lives in New York who plays blues and jazz. And he was like, wow, that's crazy. Like there isn't any dominant chords in that music. So you can't play anything interesting outside of the major stuff. Usually there's exceptions, but very rarely. Sure. So when I started to ditch the touring world and playing what I thought I had to survive, I got back to my roots, which was like improvising, playing blues and R&B and rock, and bringing all that other country stuff in. Like there's definitely playing through changes in country, but not like I did on Friday playing at the Underdog with my band. So all of that online teaching stuff has made me better because I got to
Yeah.
flesh so much new stuff out.
Yeah, and it's interesting for me, for example, when I have gotten, which is rare, actually rare, that I get the country or roots rock or that kind of gig. Even though I love that music, I've grown up in this blues and soul and um, this R&B world in Mississippi,
Right.
where you play blues, every chord's a dominant chord, everything's
Exactly.
on the table.
Yeah.
If you're willing to stretch out,
Yeah. Everything's
everything's on the
available to
table.
you. Yeah.
I've got a jazz pianist friend of mine, Bill Perry, who I play with occasionally, and he and I decided to um, sit down and be really analytical one day. We were probably drinking, and we were sitting around like, what notes can you not play over a typical 1-4-5 blues
There aren't any.
progression? With there are actually, I think the only one we came up that you might want to avoid unless it's the right scenario or the right dominant chord. There were like one or two notes out of the entire scale that you might want to mostly avoid those. Everything else is free game.
Very
Just
much
go.
so. I mean, everything is going to be an extension of that chord, a flat 9, a sharp 9. They're all. It's all about Now, can you put let's see, like a tarragon in everything? Of course, you could.
Yeah.
Is it going to taste good all the time? Not all the time. You
Maybe not.
got to think of like
Yeah.
a weird spice that has a purpose. That's your outside note or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You're not doing a whole lot of diminished or augmented runs in country music, not usually anyway.
In traditional, you can sneak it in there, but not in modern stuff. Very, very.
Yeah, traditional country felt a lot more experimental.
Well,
than
it's
what
more
we
akin to
hear.
blues too, in
Yeah.
a lot of ways.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
But definitely,
I was listening.
playing through the changes is so important in modern country, or in a more traditional country.
Yeah, I was listening to the audiobook of The Birth of Loud, which is the story of Leo Fender and Les Paul, and that whole story of how it all happened. And they got to this one segment on, and I'm going to completely blank. It's fine. I don't remember the names. Somebody can look it up. You can find it. But they talked about the first time that the Fender Telecaster / broadcaster / nocaster, whichever variation, it was probably in the broadcaster at that time, because I think it was a prototype unit that he had loaned out, and it's the first recording that has the Telecaster broadcaster on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I paused the audiobook. I'm like, all right, I'm going to find that track. I'm going to go listen to it. And I listened to it, and the interplay between the steel guitar and the Telecaster, and that was so avant-garde and out there and experimental.
Oh yeah,
for a classic country track. And I was like, this is insane. You would never hear this on the radio today.
Listen to the way like Les Paul would use delay and stuff. Like, like I think it's a song "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles." Like, there's some really wacky stuff on that. But he was, those guys were masters of that. And let's not forget, they all pretty much played the same kind of style.
Mm-hmm.
But, and forgive me before you slam me, they put different guitars in their hands out of necessities. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of them came from big band or jazz backgrounds, because that's what was the popular music of the day.
Right.
And put it onto the Les Paul or the Telecaster. And then they just kept evolving from them. So they're kind of, the background is very similar from player to player. But the instruments changed out of need, you know what I mean? And necessity. So, I mean, as I say that, I'm like, okay, well, everybody has a different style, but there was such an underlying thing. Like, if you were in the 1950s and somebody said, let's play Misty, everybody would know it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm saying, So there was an underlying standard type of guitar playing and music that was accepted in all genres, I think.
Yeah, hence the term standards for the tunes we have in the book. And if you go in the book, not all of them are what I would call traditional straight ahead jazz. There were some standards that got in there that were pop tunes, couple that were country tunes, to be honest, because they all had sort of that shared root. They all sort of came from the same place and the same idea.
Right.
And I really love that. And even it's funny because growing up in blues culture, here in Mississippi, there's a whole culture of the blues lawyer. And I don't mean the guitar players who, can afford, the doctors and lawyers who can afford like the super high end PRS and Gibson guitars and they just don't really play. What I mean is the people who like try to set rules on what is and isn't blues.
Oh
And
gosh, don't get me started.
yeah, there's a whole culture of people who are
It's
like,
in every
well, if it's not,
genre.
oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, we just sort of talked about it a little bit in the country genre,
Right.
but they'll say if it's not 1-4-5 progression, it's not blues. I'm like, what? There's like, go listen to Red Hots, Robert
Yeah.
Johnson, like that's not close to a 1-4-5. And I love using Robert Johnson as an example because there are known examples of him gigging and playing polka tunes because he played or show tunes. He played what people wanted to listen
Of
to,
course.
and that's
Why he wanted to
that's
make
how
money.
the standard developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wanted to make money.
Right.
He does it to make money. I hate to burst anybody's like artistic, like idealistic bubble, but
I had someone. No, I've been on that for years. When I first got my first like professional band at 19, all the other players were like 40, and it was great to be around them. And the bass player I remember particularly, who it was cool. He sounded like Jocko in a blues band. He was amazing and so smooth and played fretless. And I was like, who plays fretless? This is crazy. And he said people treat, we'll say blues in this instance, like it's a relic sitting on your mantle and you pull it down every once in a while and you go, oh, this is what it is. Where it's funny because the people who we idolize, who created that music, weren't thinking that way.
No.
You think Muddy Waters was trying to sound traditional, or B.B. King? They were playing what they were playing. You know what I mean? Like, do you think Miles Davis ever tried to sound like he wanted to be a bebop musician? Like, he was that because he helped create that. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
He wasn't trying to make another record that sounded like the one he did 6 records ago. You know what I mean? And so I get it. And the other soapbox that I'll get on is when modern blues music is loaded with all of these tropes about things that people who wrote blues music years ago really were living. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have a nice life, but I love playing blues music and I love playing blues, adjacent music, blues influenced music. But I'm not going to sing about how my baby left me because my wife is awesome and she's right over there. She's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Exactly.
But like I might re-sing someone's song about that and put my own spin on it, which I've done. And I have some other fun tunes that I'm releasing, this year that are blues based in nature and have those messages, but are funny or tongue in cheek. Like that's why I always thought Keb Mo was like probably, or Robert Cray, like some of the best modern blues musicians, because they told stories. You know what I mean? And you could hear it in their singing, you could hear it in their playing. They really connected with these stories. And to me, that's what it is. And I don't know much about the article, but I remember skimming this Bonamassa one recently where he said he didn't consider himself a blues guitar player. He considered himself a blues rock influence. And I was like, thank God, like he's saying it, because yeah, man, I'm right with you, waving the flag with you, because that is an evolution of sorts. You know what I mean? Like, Clapton and Free and, all these bands back then, that's what they were doing too. They were trying to take it somewhere else. I mean, I just did this big video on Clapton in the Blues Breakers era. And he was just putting his influence out there, and oh shit, it influenced Jimi Hendrix of all people. You know what I mean? Like that's how it works, But now, oh gosh, like it has to be, there's a whole group of people playing blues too that will do what I call they're playing tribute music. And this is not to slam them, but it sounds like old blues. And that's cool. Like if you want to live in that world and you want to play the guitars and you want to dress and you want to sing and you want to write those songs, that's cool. But to me, that is like not taking on the evolution of an art form, which is what most artists do. So come at me if you want, but that's the way I see it,
No, and I totally see it, and I have done both. I've done where I do my take on things, and it's very steeped in the tradition of how it was done, but I'm doing it my way kind of thing.
Right.
But I've also done the stuff where like it's definitely tribute music. This is me performing that song, trying to sound like old traditional blues music, no progression on it whatsoever. It is what it is. And
Yeah.
I think it's all valid. And I think there's home for all of it. It's just, I don't like when people get really precious about something and they're so afraid of letting people have their own voice in it. Like
Yeah.
they want to hear the voice of all those originators, which, I mean, even that's problematic because, in blues, you go far enough back, you start talking about Charlie Patton, you start talking about Bessie Smith, you start talking about Robert Johnson, and Blind Lemon Jefferson,
Right.
who's actually in the last few years a realization of my own that I've really gotten into Blind Lemon Jefferson. But they influenced, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Buddy Guy, all those Albert King, all the, Albert Collins. They influenced them,
Yeah.
and they brought it forward. And then there's new folks bringing it forward. I look at someone like my buddy Kingfish, who is doing different things. He's not, actually, I'll be honest, I'm surprised he ended up making blues records.
Really?
I used to talk to him, and he really wanted to do like straight ahead trio rock and roll. Like
Wow,
he
cool.
wanted to be like a rock power trio,
Nice.
which I will not be surprised if that comes out of him at some point.
He has the license now with some success. I mean, that's what John Mayer did. He did the opposite. I mean, he went into more of a pop route. We'll call it that, singer-songwriter. And then when he had some money, he hired Steve Jordan and Pino Palladino, and they made some other cool blues records and did a tour. That's how it works.
Yep.
But to piggyback on your point, indeed, it's all valid. What I'm saying is the stylistic orators that you feel like you have to bow down to be accepted is what I have a problem with. There's a gentleman here who I reached out to recently I said, hey, like, some of these smaller clubs in the area, is there any way you could help me get some gigs? Because I'm terrible at booking gigs. Because I've only been my own artist for like a year, so I don't really know what I'm doing. But in any case, he said, well, what you guys do is musicians' music. And I was like, what? And he was like, I was like, we're not a fusion band. We're just like playing blues songs and pushing the boundaries. And, and he was supportive. He's like, I love what you do. And I think a lot of people would. And he was like, but, you're not playing Mustang Sally, and you're not playing. And I was like, yeah, we're not, And I was like, but if that's what they want to hear, we're probably not the right band for them. But if they want to see some guys like really throwing down musicianship wise and having some fun, they might like what we do, So it was just funny that even what I was doing was being perceived as pushing the envelope. I was like, I don't know, man. Have you seen Robin Ford in his heyday? Like, that's
right.
what he did. He was taking blues somewhere else. So I don't know. It just people get really comfortable with what they know, and sometimes they don't want to hear anything new. But that being said, I mean, I'm not using like reverse delay on anything. I mean, it's like I'm playing pretty straight down the middle stuff, but we're going for it.
Yeah, you're not doing some kind of shoegaze version of blues.
I would do it, but nobody would like it.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody's going to dance to that.
I like that stuff. I was the biggest, Daniel Lanois fan in the early 2000s. I mean, completely wanted to change my whole, personality, because I loved atmospheric guitar before it was, before there was ever a church pedal board to Gray's Instagram. I was into that stuff.
Yeah, I love that stuff, and I love the sounds. I just know that it's not what I make. It's cool, and I love it when other people do it, but I am just not very good at it. It's just not my vibe. Like I said, I don't enjoy making it. I enjoy listening to it. That's a style for me.
Yeah.
So, Corey, we're approaching the hour mark, so I think it's about time we start wrapping up. We're going to head over to Patreon. So listeners, if you want to hear even more with Corey over on Patreon, you can go over to 40 Watt Podcasts. I'm sorry. You can go to 40 Watt Podcast, but you can also go to patreon.com/40 Watt Podcast, where for $5 a month, so helping support this podcast, you can get extra content after every episode that I put out this year. And y'all, I've got a bunch of great episodes coming this year. There's some really cool stuff coming down, as well as extra with Corey, where I'm gonna throw questions at him and try to throw him off. We'll see. He's been a cool cucumber so far, but we're gonna see if he can make it through the Patreon questions. It's really not that big a deal. Sorry, I'm building
I'm
that up
ready.
way more than it's
I'm
worth.
ready. It's early,
So
but
Corey,
I'm ready.
it is a little early for us this morning. So where can everyone find you on the internet?
So it's not easy as long as you could spell my last name, which they did not do at the bar Friday night.
Oh no,
they spelled it with 2 L's. But yeah, if you just Google me, you'll find a bunch of things. So you'll find I'm currently going to do like a revamp on my artist website, CoreyCongilio.com. My lesson website is workingclassguitar.com, which you can access from my my name site as well. And then all the other usual places, Instagram, Facebook. That's probably the other places. Yeah, pretty easy.
awesome.
And of course, YouTube.
So yeah, I was going to say, and as well YouTube. So listeners, a bunch of those links, if not all of them, are down in the description below. If you're not checking out the description of these episodes, either on YouTube or in the show notes on your podcast player, you should check them out. There's a lot of really cool links. There's some links to all of my sponsors, where to find find my guests all over the internet. Some of my guests have way too many places you can find them, so I don't put them all. But there's a bunch of cool stuff down there. So make sure you click and look down there for cool links and discount codes and all sorts of fun and wild, crazy stuff. So, Corey, thank you for coming on this week.
My pleasure, man. Glad we could finally do it. And great to meet you at NAMM officially.
Oh, yeah. It was great to hang out at NAMM and to hear you play, and you were killing it over at the Mythos booth.
Yeah, I was over there, wasn't I?
Yeah. I was over there too much. I kept finding myself stopping there because it felt like everyone I knew was stopping there. And so I was trying to get away so I'd give Zach his space because I knew he was trying to actually do business.
Right.
And I was just trying to hang out.
They're cool guys and they're fun to talk to. So what's not to like?
Exactly right. Exactly. So listeners, hopefully I see you or hear you over on the Patreon. If not, we'll catch you next week. And until then, be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and make some noise.